Welcome to the Small Church Podcast, the podcast for church leaders who want to make a difference in their communities. We're your hosts, Tony Marr and Bruce Montgomery, and we're excited to be with you today. On this podcast, we'll be discussing the latest trends, strategies, and ideas for effective leadership in small-sized churches. So whether you're a pastor, a ministry leader, or a volunteer, this podcast is for you. Each week, we'll bring you interviews with experienced church leaders who have valuable insights to share. We'll also explore topics like team building, community outreach, spiritual growth, and much more. So if you're looking for practical advice and inspiration to help you lead your church with excellence, you've come to the right place. The Small Church Podcast is brought to you by Hire Ministries. Hire Ministries is an organization that exists to help Christian leaders in the churches they serve through coaching and consulting, all for little or no cost. For more information on Hire Ministries or to find out more about the Small Church Podcast, please visit hireministries.com. Thanks for tuning into this week's edition of the Small Church Podcast. Robert, you've been doing the Small Church Podcast now for several months, and every week when we record, I realize that we still haven't redone the opening yet. So you're the nameless, faceless one on the podcast.
And on the website, because the creative photographer guy is too busy to go do his own headshot photo shoots.
Yeah, I will say that I've asked you about 10 times to send me that info.
I'm so bad. Melissa and I both need to redo our headshots, and we were out this weekend doing photos for the Alzheimer's walk out at Bristol Motor Speedway, and it was people were like, "Oh, hey, what about?" And I'm going, "Man, we really need to do some headshots because our site does not look very updated." And so yes. I'm nameless and faceless in this, in my own company, in my own church, all those things. I am pretty faceless everywhere. So
I think that there's some good that comes with that as well, though.
I love being hidden. It is I think I spent a lot of my early years wanting to be seen, and now my favorite thing is just to not be. But we kind of live in this social media, podcast social media, internet world that you kind of have to be out there some, but I'd prefer to never be seen.
Well, then we will hold off on our plans to start video recording this and being on YouTube and doing that whole thing just for you. We'll
just
stop
for
with
me.
That.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah.
Yes. So sorry for all y'all.
So welcome to the Small Church Podcast. Let you guys know that Robert and I are both a little bit under the weather today. Bruce Montgomery is on vacation. He's the only one who's not sick. And so
we went on vacation and got sick.
We did. We both went on vacation. So for those of you that have been following along with the Small Church Podcast over the last couple of months, you have noticed that things have gone seamlessly. We haven't missed a week, but it's actually been several weeks since we've sat down together and recorded an episode because we have both been on vacation for the last couple of weeks. And Robert, you went camping.
I did. I went glamping. Let's not get confused. My idea of roughing it's walking the back nine, like a hotel without an indoor pool, is like the place where I kind of find myself going, man, do I really want to stay here? But I do not like camping. It was not a value of my family's growing up. I've literally camped one time, and it was the worst experience I've ever had in my life. This is one of those resort type places where it's a tent, but it's a fancy tent with a floor and running water and a full kitchen, a full bathroom, a TV, Wi-Fi. Yes, all in the tent. And so
is that like a yurt?
I think it is. I think it is that. And so anyway, some friends of ours, they own it. It's if you're interested, it's Glamping Retro up kind of Spivey Mountain, right next to
this episode of the Small Church Podcast
brought to you by Glamping Retro. It's an awesome place to stay though, and so we just, man, it was so great. Every night we're just out and at the campfire, sitting around with all the other people who were up there, and we're making s'mores and just building relationships with people and hanging out. And that part of it, I love. That part of the kind of motorhome camping type of living, I really, really enjoy because I just love hearing people's stories. But as far as just camping, man, so. But anyway, I got to cry a little bit up there. The Braves ended up losing, and that was not a good day for me. And
we're
so
both
it was a great
basking
time
in baseball misery right now.
But you got to go to the beach.
I did get to go to the beach. Yeah, that was nice. But my team still lost, got swept. At least you guys won a game.
We did win one. It was ugly, but we won it.
I had a friend of mine text me the next morning after the Dodgers went out and said, "Hey, I just saw the news this morning. I didn't stay up that late. I'm really sorry for you." And I just responded back, "Winter has started early. I'll see you in the spring."
Winter is coming.
Yeah, my world kind of goes, and I think that's part of what's happening with my allergies and kind of chest congestion and stuff. Is just my body is just into depression right now because I don't do well without baseball, and
And you're a Lakers fan, which is going to be horrible.
it's going to be really rough.
Could be a rough season.
Yeah, yeah. And anytime you have LeBron on your team, it's going to be a rough season, I think.
And myself, and that's something too. Is and people do not care about this. Oh my goodness! Like we really need to do the other podcast where it's the random stuff, and we don't address all this in the one time we talk a week. But we talk more than that. But like our teams are so opposite. Like Dodgers, Braves, Celtics, Lakers. I mean USC, Alabama. I mean we are just very, very, very.
Why you're just like digging deep this morning.
Yeah, I mean, it's hockey wise, you're a Vegas guy.
Absolutely, we did win the Stanley Cup last year.
And so I probably would be early on because of Joe Sakic and Patrick Waugh. I was an Avalanche fan, but very much a Predators guy now, just trying to have something that's close and actually pull for something in my state. But yeah, I mean, we just are very opposite sports guys, but. Yeah, what the Lakers are probably going to struggle, and we just hired maybe my least favorite coach ever to be a senior consultant.
Jeff Van Gundy.
Wow. I don't like him as an announcer. I didn't enjoy him as a coach. At least when he coached teams I didn't like, it was fun to pull against him. And now he's like a senior consultant. So it's like when LeBron comes to your team, you have to pull for this guy now. I have to want Jeff Van Gundy to succeed so that the Celtics can do well. And so we'll see how that goes.
So we're so far off topic, but we're just going to run with it. That talking about hockey, I have been a peripheral hockey fan for a while. I'm not huge into hockey. We had an IHL team in Las Vegas growing up, the Las Vegas Thunder, and went to several of those games, and that was great. So I was one of those guys that I'd tune in for a few minutes of the Stanley Cup Finals every year, and then check the headlines every now and then, and until Vegas got a team. And then our very first year, Vegas goes to the Stanley Cup Finals. We lost, but we made it. We got there. And so that was really excited. Started following hockey a little bit. My daughter, McKenna, about a year ago, decided she was going to become obsessed with hockey, completely obsessed with hockey, out of the blue. And we found out that it was because she wanted something that was her own. She wanted something. She's a Dallas Stars fan, and where that came from, we have no idea. She loves the color green, and so we think that that's the whole thing behind it. And she follows religiously. She's checking stats. We did a fantasy hockey league this year for her, and she got like all Toronto Maple Leafs and Dallas Stars because those are her two favorite teams. And she doesn't like the Golden Knights at all because they knocked out the Stars in the playoffs last year. And so I went looking, because she is such a trooper that she goes every year to see the Dodgers play and
reads a book for 9 innings.
She doesn't. She really doesn't. We will go to a 3 or 4 game set either in Cincinnati or Atlanta or Pittsburgh or wherever it is. This year we went to Baltimore and saw them play the Orioles at Camden Yards. And from the moment that she was like 3 years old and old enough to know what's going on, she is completely engaged into
That's awesome.
All 3 games, all 9, 10, 11, 12, 16 innings. We went to Philadelphia one year to see the Dodgers play the Phillies, and the game went 16 innings. And I mean, my kids are just completely engaged into the whole thing. And so she will go see the Lakers play. She will get drug along to all these things. And she loves baseball. She really does love baseball. But I wanted to take her to see the Dallas Stars play the Nashville Predators. And so I looked, they play in December. I've never bought tickets to a hockey game. And so I thought, baseball, you can sit up in the nosebleeds and get tickets for under $20 usually. And those are some of our favorite tickets sometimes because you get great views from up there. It's just the true fans are up there. It's great. We love it. The cheapest tickets I could find were
had to sell McKenna.
$96 a ticket.
You had to sell McKenna to get the ticket. It's horrible. Yeah. Hockey's rough. It's hard to go to. And you're like me. You've got several kids, and so when you go, it's not just usually you and one other kid.
Right.
It's the family. So now you're talking 5 or 6 people.
I'm going to need to take out a loan if we're going to make this happen.
More people listen to the podcast.
So if anybody listening has any connections, if you're in Nashville and you have season tickets to the Predators and you're not wanting to go to see them play the Dallas Stars, please give us a call.
This
We'd be happy
podcast
to
has
take
added
some.
value to you. Sell us your tickets cheap.
Or even if it hasn't, even if it hasn't added value, just sell us your tickets cheap. We'll be happy to take them off your hands.
That's hilarious.
All right, so with that, this is the Small Church Podcast. We're now 10 minutes in, and we've said absolutely nothing of worth to anybody except for us.
This is why Bruce has to be here.
That's exactly right. We're talking about a subject today that is something that I think is really critical to a lot of our listeners, and that's this whole idea of what does it look like to be in ministry? What does it look like to be in full-time ministry, and what are the things that keep us going? And I told you before we started recording that I had a funny story to tell that was going to kind of expose some things about myself. When I was a 18 or 19-year-old student at Milligan Bible College and going towards ministry, looking at a lifelong vocation in ministry, I took an intro to ministry class, or it was a Bible leadership class, something like that. And we were given a book to read. It was required curriculum, and it was by a guy by the name of Eugene Peterson. Sure, most of our listeners have heard of Eugene Peterson. He's written many, many books. He is probably most famous for his compilation, his translation of the Bible as The Message. I even think you kind of touched on him in a sermon a couple weeks ago. You didn't mention him by name, but I kind of looked over at my wife when we were sitting in your chairs and said, I think he's talking about Eugene Peterson right now. Little side note, Eugene Peterson lived most of his adult life in Bel Air, Maryland, which is a suburb of Baltimore where my family lives. And so we go up to Bel Air a couple times a year, and when Eugene was still alive, I would always try to figure out where does he live, because it's not a very large place. And I'm a huge, huge fan of his writings. And so I would try to figure out where does he live, and could I drop in and say hi to him, and could never figure out where he lived. But it's not a very big place, so my investigative skills are not very good.
Not very
there.
good, yeah.
No. So anyways, we were given a book called Working the Angles, and the book is out of print. You can't pick it up anymore unless you find it in an old bookstore somewhere. You can't buy it on Amazon. But it was one of those books that in reading it, it completely changed my thought process on ministry. And over the last 25 years and working in ministry, consulting with churches, I have used Working the Angles over and over and over. I mean, so many times that I can't even begin to tell you. I couldn't quantitate it, how many times I have quoted what I thought was Working the Angles and talked about Eugene Peterson and his book, Working the Angles, because what he talks about is these three pillars of church leadership, and those being the pastoral care side of things, leadership, and then preaching, and how all three of these are critical to what we do, and yet no one's good at all three of them. And we'll dive into this a lot more, but first, the wrap up to my story. And so I have talked and given Eugene Peterson credit, Working the Angles credit for this for decades, literally 2 decades, 25 years. And in preparation for this episode, I went and pulled the book down off of my bookshelf to try to just refresh myself with it and the ideals, and found that that's not at all what Working the Angles says. Not at all what Working the Angles says. Working the Angles does talk about the shape of pastoral integrity, and it does address the challenges and essential aspects of ministry. But the three crucial angles that Peterson talks about in Working the Angles are prayer, reading, and preaching. And in 25 years that I have recommended this book to people so many times, quoted this book so many times, I wasn't quoting that book. In fact, it was a different Eugene Peterson book called The Contemplative Pastor, where he talks about those three different components of ministry. And there are so many different things within what I've done for the last 25 years and talking about these pillars of pastoral ministry, pastoral care, leadership, and preaching, that I thought were all Eugene Peterson, And turns out they weren't Eugene Peterson at all. And I don't know how much of it is stuff that I have just adapted from other readings, from his other book, or how many of it are just things that I've made up on my own. And so maybe, Robert, I have created a whole new way of thinking about pastoral ministry that I need to write a book. Yeah. And so I did some research on that and found out that's not true at all, that this whole idea of the 3 pillars of pastoral ministry have been around for generations, and it's nothing unique to my understanding or my thinking at all. It's just something that I have picked up along the way from many different books and ideals and thoughts. But regardless of who it came from, Mr. Peterson, myself, or a plethora of other noble scholars and authors, it is a very important concept that I think everyone in ministry needs to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. One, if you really want to read that book, Working the Angles, you can read it for free digitally through Google Books.
Wow.
Because you told me about that, and I have not read it yet, but I'm actually looking at it right now. But they have it in there inside of their PDF stuff that you can read on online. So there you go, Google Books for the win. These are 3 really, really interesting topics, and because, like you said, we tend to, like spiritual gifts, really succeed with 1 or 2, or really struggle with 1 or 2, and there's a little bit of or which one will I struggle with, and sometimes it's even seasonal for me. Like I've found myself really, I think the care, which is probably the pastor shepherd part of it, is probably something that at times I've struggled with. Just not a ton of compassion. Grace, mercy aren't really high on my spiritual gifts list, and so those are things that I've tended to struggle with more. Where the teaching and the leadership part of just working and I'm sure you're going to give a better kind of a real clear definition of each of the 3 of these, and we can kind of dive in there as we go. But those are such complex topics that really, it's hard to, when you struggle, like when you feel like you're, as a pastor, especially in a smaller church, and I think that as the churches get bigger and you have pastors on staff that literally their entire job is to go to hospital ministry. I had this one church on staff at, and we had this guy that he would go in and carry a little keyboard that was about the length of his arm, and he would just walk in, and he was a former music minister that as he had aged, had transitioned into pastoral care. And so he would go into the hospital and literally just walk down the hall with his little keyboard, and he'd walk in and just play it one-handed, just hold it in his arm and just play and sing hymns with people. And like, he was just that guy that when he walked into the room, this was, some of this was even back in Evangelism Explosion and things like that, kind of back in those days. And it was a little bit of door-to-door type stuff and walking neighborhoods and talking with people. And he would show up and knock on a door, somebody that had visited the church. And, like, I could walk in there and sit down and say the exact same words that he said, as kind as he said them, and it would be a good conversation, but nothing. He'd just walk in and sit down, just lean in and go, "How are you today?" And they'd just start crying and sharing all these stories and all these different things. But it's just like, man, like, I'm not that person. I just couldn't do that. And he just had that way of drawing it in. So
yeah, some
3
people
very different
really
things.
just have that shepherding gift.
Yeah.
And just like some people really have a gift of leadership, and some people really have a gift of preaching and teaching, public speaking. Whenever we sit down and we meet with a church that we're helping them through a search process to look for a new lead pastor, or any staff position really, and we sit down and I explain this idea of the angles to them, the 3 components, and say, which of these is most important to you? It doesn't matter the size of the church. It doesn't matter the location of the church. Every single time when I say, okay, when you look at these, shepherding, pastoral care, leadership ability, and their ability to preach and teach, which is most important to you in that? Inevitably, every single time they say that we want someone who's great at all of them. And then I look at them and I say, great, well, Jesus is already the head of the church, but he's not available right now to take the job as your senior pastor to be teaching here every Sunday. Because the truth is, most of us in vocational ministry are good at one of those. Mm-hmm. You've got some guys that aren't good at any of them, and they probably shouldn't be in ministry if that's the case. You've got most are good at one, You've got some that are good at two, and those are your rock stars. Those are your guys that are great at two of those are your rock star preachers. No one is good at all three of them. There was only one, and that was Jesus, who was prophet, priest, and king. And he was the only one who was good at all three. And so none of us are that, but yet they're all three critical components of our role in pastoral leadership. And so, like you said, it's understanding where are my strengths, where are the things that I really excel at, and then what are the things that I need to pay some attention to because I'm not naturally drawn to that. It's not in my, it doesn't just come easy to me. It's not effortless for me to do this. And yet each of them is so critical to be, and I hate the term well-rounded. I hate the term balanced, but because I don't know that we're designed to be balanced. I don't know that God created us to be balanced. And but to be a well-rounded preacher, pastor, minister, leader, there are components of these that we have to do, and that we have to make sure that we're taking time and effort into each of them to give our people what they deserve.
And that's the hard thing is this kind of right before we recorded this, I was sitting at a coffee shop and a church member came in and was just talking and somewhat pitched these three things. It was preacher and pastor, which is kind of the pastoral care and then the teaching side of what we're talking about. And instead of leadership, they kind of mentioned disciple. And they were like, what do these three things mean? What's the definition? And they had, of course, their definition of what it is. And for them, discipleship really is more fellowship. And I'm like, okay, and so you keep trying to have that conversation and go. But people really do look at this. And if for you and I think these are conversations we talk about, and if somebody's listening, if you started your own church, you kind of somewhat get to set the standard. People still have a preconceived notion of what pastors should be, and I don't know. It's hard because I don't want somebody. Pastoral care to a lot of people means that throughout the week they take a jar of honey or a bag of cookies and they go to somebody's house, knock on the door, and say, "Thanks for visiting this past week. Here's some cookies." And, we want to give you a coffee mug or whatever. I don't want you coming to my house. I'll join a community group pretty quickly. I'll get engaged. I'll be a part. I'll find my people. Just because you stand on stage for 30 minutes a week and they write you a paycheck does not mean you're going to be the person. I need you to connect with me. I need to be able to listen, but and engage and hear from the Holy Spirit in that space. But that's a hard line, as the church will start to determine what it is. And if you didn't start your church and you're wondering what your church was looking for when they hired you, if you can find the job description and you really read it through the lens of these three things, because you always go in and you look at churches and you go, hey, but I know for a fact that you can look at the job description that they've posted, and before you ever walk through the door, you know what the last pastor struggled with.
Right.
Because that's the thing they're focusing on.
Yeah.
And so, last pastor was great. So we still expect you to be great at pastoral care, and we expect you to be a leader, but your preaching has to be crazy up here. Well, I'm just going to be honest. If you're a really good preacher, you're probably spending 10 to 15 hours a week, sometimes more, really prepping a sermon, working the text, getting that together. It doesn't leave a lot of time for you to go sit in the hospital and sing hymns, and it doesn't give a lot of time for you to go watch every little kid's soccer match and sit with their parents and hand out, cards as you walk up and down the sidelines of, your next sermon series. It's a hard space to get, and that, like you said, balance we set ourselves up for so much failure inside of balance because we think, oh man, I can be balanced. And maybe we can balance a little better than we are, but I just don't know that that's the perfection or the goal, the target of what we should be looking towards as balance. I think we should be looking into what, maybe asking some different questions and getting to a different end goal.
Yeah, I agree. I think that anytime you have a conversation with someone, it's important that they really understand and internalize what their gifts are and what their gifts are not. Because we all think that we're better than we are, right? We all think that almost every person that I talk to and talk through this concept with them and this idea with them and say, okay, so where would you say let's rank them 1, 2, 3. And almost every person who's in a senior leadership position says, oh, I'm a great teacher. I'm a really great teacher. I feel like that's my strength. I'm a really great teacher. And a lot of times you look at them and say, no, you're not. You're not, and that's okay. That's okay. You're good. You're good. You get the job done. You do well, and you're great for where you're at. But you're not. Throw out name. You're not Andy Stanley. You're not. You're not a great. And so let's knock that down a little bit, and let's look at some of these other things to really self-assess ourselves and say, okay, so where do you have the potential to really truly be great? Where are the things, if you could just be great at one of these, where do you feel like you have the most natural ability to really work? This is the whole Strengths Finder thing that we've talked about a lot before. Where can we figure that you have natural ability? And in the Strengths Finder program, they didn't want to call it Strengths Finder originally. They wanted to call it Talent Finder, but that was already copyrighted because the whole idea is we're not finding your strengths really. We're finding the areas where you have potential for them to be strengths, and then how can we identify these things and grow them to where they are. You do them better than 95% of the other people. And so whenever someone says to me, I'm a great preacher, I'm a great teacher, I say, okay, are you better than 95% of the other pastors in the world? Do you put yourself in that top 5% echelon? And if so, then why are you not getting a million streams of your sermons every week? So maybe that's something that you're good at, and we can work at getting that to great. But let's have some real self-internalization and identification of where our gifts are and where we need to be working on where we're growing, and taking time to really develop those things.
And I think that's tough, is because they may actually be a really good communicator, but sometimes we have just a misconstrued or poor view of what our actual skill set is. And so I think I'm a pretty good teacher in that space. I think I'm comfortable on stage. I think I work hard to do the text, but I also understand the deficiencies inside of that, of where I'm at. I understand the things that I need to do better. And so because of that, I would never say I'm a, insert, like you said, insert name here, whether you're looking at somebody that would be more of a modern style of teaching, an Andy Craig, Matt Chandler, David Platt, J.D. Greer, guys like that would be a touch more in that space. And that's a wide range. All of those guys teach very, very differently. Or if you're looking at somebody that maybe would be modern, but, Ed Young, but, teaches a little more older style, or even go to John MacArthur and some of these guys. If you're looking at these spectrums, everybody can be really talented. And sometimes I think we go, I'm really talented because these guys are wrong in how they teach. Okay, maybe. I really like exegetical teaching. I don't get to do it a ton in my system, but I like that. But I would want to frame that in more of a, style of some of these first guys that we mentioned, Matt Chandler and, Craig Rochelle and JD, guys like that. I like that space. So it's kind of having an understanding and being able to be real and honest with yourself. Because when somebody comes to you and says, and you're looking for coaching and you're looking for help and you're looking for leadership and you're going, no, I'm a great preacher. I'm a great teacher of the word. So what I need help with is this. Maybe you're actually really, really good at pastoral care, and you don't ever hear anybody say anything about your pastoral care because you're so good at it, and you're going, man, nobody acknowledges that, so I must be terrible, so I need help here. It might be something that you've set because the standard has been kind of said of, well, you got to have an online service, you've got to have this, you've got to have this. So the teaching is the most important thing. And I think there's an argument for that. Sunday mornings with some stuff, but this, like you said, we've got to be able to serve in all three of these areas. And when you're in a small church, you have to be able to do all three of these, because we don't get to just ship this out or send it off or put it on somebody else. Hire a staff member to take over pastoral care or take over the admin leadership stuff. We have to sit in those roles when we're pastoring a campus. I mean, I'm part of a network, and I have to do every one of these things every day.
Yeah, and I've had the honor of seeing all three of these done incredibly well, done on the level of great throughout the course of my life. My home church growing up, Central in Las Vegas, my pastor growing up was Gene Apple, who Gene was, his leadership ability was as tops as you could ever be. When Gene took over Central, when my dad was actually one of the elders that hired Gene when he was 24 years old, straight out of Bible college, and Central was averaging about 250 people. When Gene left to go be the senior pastor at Willow Creek in Chicago, I don't know if you remember all of that, when Bill Hybels decided he was going to step back from that role and just do the WCA, and they brought Gene in to be the official senior pastor of Willow Creek. Central was about 10,000 people. So over the course of that time, he grew this church from 250 to 10,000, and he was a good preacher. He was a good communicator, a good speaker. No one would ever say that he was a great teacher. He was good. He was really good. And he had to work hard at the pastoral care. He did it, but it was an effort for him. He loved people. He cared about people. But his wheelhouse was leadership. Man, it was dreaming and planning and leading and guiding and directing. And you could see that in the direction that the church went and everything that he's done since. What he did at Willow, what he's been doing. He's currently at Eastside in Los Angeles in the Fullerton area and has done incredible things with that church there. And then, excuse me, in high school, we were a part of a team that went and started a different church on the other side, that Central decided that they wanted to start another church, and they brought in a guy by the name of Mike Bro to be the lead pastor for there. One of the greatest communicators that I've ever heard. Absolutely phenomenal communicator. People came to our church to listen to Mike preach. He was phenomenal. And then he went on to be the teaching pastor at Willow Creek and at several other mega churches all across the country. He is one of the greatest communicators of Scripture, communicators, period, on the planet Earth. His pastoral care ability, very, very low. And his leadership was also something that he really had to work on. Excuse me. But he excelled at one, but needed to really put a lot of effort into the other two. Then when he left and the associate pastor became the new senior pastor, a guy by the name of, excuse me, Kevin Oder. Kevin was maybe the greatest pastor that I've ever seen. Kevin had this crazy ability that I've never seen anyone else have this ability, that Canyon Ridge Church was several thousand people, 4,500, 5,500 when I was working there and doing internships there. And Kevin seemingly knew every single person's name and every single person's story. You could be a first-time guest that would come one time, and then you'd come back 3 months later, and he would remember your name and ask you how your grandmother was doing by name. He just cared about people, just genuinely cared about people. Kevin would tell you himself he wasn't the greatest teacher, but yet this church that when he took over had gone from a senior pastor, a lead pastor who was one of the greatest teachers you could ever hear, to now a lead pastor who was couldn't hold a candle to Mike as far as teaching goes, but his ability to care for people was off the charts. The church continued to grow because Kevin realized I need to put other people on stage that their gifts are in the teaching and communication, and I need to focus on the things that I'm really great at. The problem is, in a small church, you maybe don't have that ability. Yeah. You don't have the the gifts around you to make all of that happen.
Yeah, I mean, this past week we're in a 2 week. This past Sunday at our church, we're in a 2 week stretch where we're talking about just the vision, and so we're casting and setting just what just kind of why we do what we do, and just in case people are new, and it's just a good reminder for even our staff, but also a reminder for the people who this is home for them every week, that they come in and are a part. And when I opened up this week, I mean, we've got 4 stools sitting up there, and I've got me and 3 other people, one other staff member, and two people that are just church members, and they serve heavily and go from there. And in that space, I kind of said, hey, we could jump up here and talk about where there's no vision, people perish, which, as a verse is taken out of context a lot. But, we could teach that correctly. I mean, and we did a year ago. And we could sit up here and go into all the world, and we could talk Matthew 28 and, Acts 1. And, I mean, we can jump into these texts, and we can work this idea of going and say, or we can let people who are out here actually doing these things, who are living, who understand that the harvest is plenty, the workers are few, that Jesus saw them and they were helpless and harassed, and he went to be where they are, and we can let them tell their stories of ministries that they're a part of jobs that they have, and how they're serving and caring for and equipping people. And it's a better sermon than I could have ever preached. Sitting there, and actually a lot of people came up, and it's just like, we need more of that. And again, I feel like that I do a pretty good job of working the text. I'm not the only person that teaches at our church. I probably do 40 out of the 52 weeks. But I just think people enjoy seeing other people that aren't, I'm air quoting, like you can see me. We may need to start the video. Air quoting, like, the clergy or the priest or the pastor or the however you refer to yourself, or you're referred to in your organization. They see that role is so above, and it's, well, that's your job and things. But when you get people who show up and just run the soundboard like they do each week, you get people who show up and just get a mic and do the welcome and say, hey, we're glad you're here today, fill out a Connect card. They serve in the toddler room just like everybody else does. Those are just things that we kind of sit in and go, okay, this is something that I can understand. I can rally around. I need to be more intentional about the call that God has put in my life, because if they can do that, they're no different than me. They didn't go, they haven't studied, they don't have the experience, they don't have the calling that Robert or Tony or whoever the pastor is. They're just like me. And I think that's important. And so if teaching's a struggle for you, there's ways to get around that, even in a small church. I mean, it's once a month, spend time with people. If pastoral care is your thing, you're already doing that. If leadership's your thing, you're already doing that. As you're equipping people, or you're kind of looking out and you're hearing people's stories, like once a month, let somebody sit on stage as a part of the series you're teaching, and let them just tell their story inside of that area and that idea. And it, for me, it requires me taking notes. I love people so much, but when you start hearing a bunch of stories, you go up to somebody and you're going, hey, you had this addiction thing. And they're like, I have no clue what you're talking about. And their wife's like, what addiction did you have? And it's like, I didn't have an addiction. You can cause marital problems if you go up with the wrong story to the wrong person. So, I have to take notes and kind of remember. But it's the thing of like, hey, this person has this story, and I want to really, be able to see if they're willing to share that.
Yeah.
And those are hard things to do, but there are ways that you can kind of get around some of those things and lean into the weakness, and or turn into the skid into the turn. There's some analogy there that I really know would work, but I don't have it.
So we've talked quite a bit about the pastoral care side of things. We've talked about the communication, the preaching, teaching kind of things. We haven't talked much about the leadership aspect, the third of those pillars there. And it's something that I think a lot of people just naturally think that they're doing, and really maybe they're not in any way. That by your role as a leader in a church, you think that you're doing leadership, when really maybe you're just occupying a space.
So it's like we have a title by position, not that we've earned it.
Exactly.
So I say help me. Like, I think people probably assume that we've had lunch 3 times when we talk about this. So kind of define that out for me. When you say leadership, tell me, kind of help all of us that are listening here understand kind of what those steps look like, and then we'll unpack that, I'm sure. But yeah,
You're actively guiding
okay,
somewhere. You're guiding somewhere. You are driving the bus going in some direction that has been predetermined and identified, and both on an individual basis with people within your congregation and the organization as a whole, that you are providing guidance and direction to take them someplace that is going to better the individual and better the organization.
so it's really a step into, like, personally getting some time where weekly you're sitting down for a set amount of time, and I think it's probably different for everybody. Kind of that weekly you're spending some time, monthly you're spending some time, quarterly you're spending maybe a little larger time, that you're looking at, through Scripture, through the lens of your community, through those things that you're saying, okay, what's the next step? What's God calling us to? How do we lean in here? And then as you feel the Holy Spirit speaking and working and showing, you're then stepping into your leadership team, deacons, elders that you're sitting with and going, here's the next steps. And there's different leadership. And and if you've ever read a John Maxwell book, you maybe have to be out on the farm helping, throw the hay or whatever to win the trust of the most influential person in the room. But, those moments of then working with that leadership, if it's inside of children's ministry, it's inspiring those leaders and spending time around them. So then it's kind of getting to the group where you feel God leading and working with them in that space.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. But I think the key is that we're doing something. We're going somewhere as individuals and as an organization, that we're not just stagnant. And you, as the pastor of that church, as again, your air quotes that nobody's seeing, the leader of that church, have to play a defined and important role in that. That either that or you're handing the keys off to someone who can. That the number of times that we'll talk with churches or talk with leaders and say, so what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
And it's, well, we're doing service every Sunday. So how are you leading? Well, I'm preaching a sermon every Sunday morning and Sunday night. Well, no, you're preaching. How are you leading? It's a different thing. Well, no, I'm preaching. I'm leading them from the pulpit. No, you're preaching. You're teaching them. How are you leading them to get from where they are to where they want to be? And as an organization, how are you leading from where you are to where you want to be? And how have you defined those steps, how you're going to get there, where you're going? And first off, where you're going, let's define where you're going, where you're trying to get to, and then how you're going to get there, and what are you actively doing to help guide and direct to get there.
So two things. One, I actually do the air quotes. Tony just keeps his arms crossed and says air quotes. I actually do the air quotes, and so I need you to know I'm more invested in that part of it.
You really are.
Than okay, now, like, I think old school preachers, when I was growing up, you've gone from preaching to meddling kind of thing. You've actually gone from just talking about something that's important to kind of stepping into my life. I'm so sorry. Guys, it's way better than the one podcast that the sound was bad, but I'm sure it's annoying with two guys that are fighting Northeast Tennessee allergies. This is the kicker. This is the part that I think bivocational pastors, I would assume the vast majority, which, I kind of transitioned in recently. And so since we recorded our last podcast.
You're kicked out of the club.
I am somewhat. It's weird. I transitioned to where I had a full-time job that probably covered 70% of my 75% of my income, and then I offset the other 25% doing bivocational, or doing ministry. Now I've kind of flipped, and I have, it's about the same thing, but I get a little more return from the church in that space. But in that, like, I look at this role and I look at this leadership and I look at this idea, this concept. And I'm going, okay, how do I take and do more of that you're talking about? What does it look like? Because when you're bivocational, and I'm still actually trying to readjust because I've been bivocational for several years now, and I'm having to readjust back into kind of more of a full time ministry. And I know all y'all are like, oh, poor baby. I mean, as you hear me say that, but it's a heavy weight, and when you kind of take that. But when somebody's bivocational, Tony, and they're going, man, I just put in 60 hours at Lowe's this week.
Yeah.
I just worked the night shift at, 3 call centers, or I just did this here. I just did that. I got home. I got a few hours sleep. I had to get my kids to school. I had to get back there. I had about 3 hours a day. 2 of that was trying to get a sermon that made me actually sound like I knew what the Bible said. On Sunday, I had Saturday. I did sleep in a little bit. We were up at 8 and immediately gone to soccer, immediately gone to all this. We got home. The football game was on in the background. The family was all hanging out, and I was just trying to finish up the odds and ends to get ready. How in the world am I supposed to lead? What does it look like for me to do more than just preach a sermon? What does it look like for me to do more than just show up at somebody's hospital bed? Because like as complicated as it is for some people, it's a little easy. It's very checkable task. Oh, you were sick. I showed up. I was there for you. But the vision, the mission, the values, the leadership portion of this thing of rallying that together through the lens of Scripture, through the lens of prayer, through the lens of letting the Holy Spirit speak. What do you do in that moment? And what's kind of been your recommendation as you're sitting with pastors who are going, man, I just don't know how to do this leadership thing?
I think some very practical steps are lean into people. That I don't care what size church you're in. You have people that are leaders in their world.
Yep.
You have people that are teachers, that are engineers, that run a farming business. You've got people that are leaders in your church. Lean into them. And in talking about, I loved what you said about breaking down the hours of the day. One of the things that I love to tell guys is that if it's taking you 15, 20 hours, even let's just say 10, 15 hours to write a sermon, what if you brought in a guest speaker just once a month? What could you do with an extra 10, 15 hours? So that extra 10, 15 hours, how could you use that throughout the rest of the month? Another 4 or 5 hours a week if you divide that out to focus on some of these other things. How much more time could you spend with people if just one Sunday a month, just one weekend a month, you brought in a guest speaker that freed up that time for you that week, and then you reallocated that throughout your month? How much more time could you spend at a coffee shop talking with some guys or women in your church that are leaders in the areas of the community outside of the church to say, what can we do here within our church and in our community here? So it's reallocating some of your time to be able to invest into some of the areas that you need to spend more time.
Yeah, and I mean, and that coffee shop thing is definitely, I mentioned right before we recorded this, I had one guy show up, and literally I think he was there almost 3 hours. And I don't typically just kind of have that much time that I can give, but I that day I did, and I was glad to be able to do it. But then as soon as he left, another couple from our church walked in, older couple, Catholic background. We are very much not a Catholic church, and the wife sat down and was just like, tell me about, like, as I'm doing this, how do I dive in? And I got a chance to really kind of disciple and do, but being in that community and being in that space has been a huge help. And one of the things that allows me to do that is, I probably teach. I mean, if you're part of a network or things, every pastor in your network teaches different than you. There's no way you teach identical to someone else. You may have the same study habits, but you have different teaching styles. But like we have in our network, we kind of plan our series out for a year. We hold it loosely. If something comes up, we're very willing to change, and we do on the fly. But we sit in this space of I kind of know what I'm teaching, So I know this, this next year we're opening up with a spiritual discipline series and talking through some prayer and fasting and really trying to continue to lean into that topic. I know we're going to teach through the book of Ruth for a few weeks. I know we're teaching a Craig Groeschel book. And so I can already be working those things now, and I can be reading and praying and working through, and that gives a ton of stress relief for me with the teaching side because I know that I've got time to invest and do and to be in.
Yeah.
But that sitting with people is so big because I was sitting here with my friend who, she's trying to figure, she's still, I'm like, I actually asked him, I was like, how does this whole Catholic thing work? Like, how does this work out? Because we are very much not Catholic. And she's like, no, here's how I see Jesus. And here's this. And I've probably never leaned into this part of the Catholic viewpoint and things. And I'm like, oh, then all that makes sense. But she was just trying to figure out how to study the Bible better. How can I read alongside of this? And when you can get people who want, and you have people who want to study God's word and want to do, who want to be invested, and you can give time to them, they're going to be people who help move the other parts of the church forward, whether it's your people making coffee and opening front doors or serving in children's and students and family ministry or running your tech and, PowerPoint slides in the background. Nobody uses PowerPoint anymore, but it's just those types of things. And so, no, that's a good step there, Tony. And I think it's hard. This might be the hardest one because it's the easiest one to neglect.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I want to touch on really quick when it comes to leadership that I think it can't be undersold, and yet so often it's neglected, is reading. And the number of times, every guy that I coach, every person that I coach, one of the first things that I ask them is, what are you reading right now? And the number of times that I hear guys say, I just don't enjoy reading. You're not going to grow as a leader if you're not developing yourself as a leader. And if you don't enjoy reading, listen to podcasts, there's so many tools, resources out there to grow as a leader. You don't have it all together. You read any book on leadership and they will tell you the biggest thing is reading other leaders, reading what other people are doing. I use a program called Headway that gives 15 to 18 minute audio, or you can read them if you're not an audio person, synopsis of books. And then I have a personal goal of mine that I do at least one book a day. And some days if I'm driving a lot or on the treadmill for a long period of time, that I'll sometimes do 2, 3, even 4 books a day. And then they give you a great synopsis of the book. And then if it's something that has really triggered me, then I know now that's a book that I want to go pull off the shelf, order off of Amazon and read the whole thing. But instead of investing hours into reading, all these different books, I get the quick synopsis of it. They give you all the key points. And then if I want to dive into that more, then I go buy it and read the book. And I take notes on what I'm listening to, unless I'm on the treadmill. I take notes on the key points that I love and then go back and explore them later. But it cannot be undersold, the importance of investing into yourself through reading or listening to podcasts. If you're listening to this, you're doing that right now. I would take it a step further. And what are you reading? What are you constantly reading that is growing you as a leader, growing you as a pastor, as a teacher? There's so many different things that you can get just from leaning into the knowledge of others.
No, that's so good. And this past year, and I've actually not done as well in the last month or so, but like we've taught some different series though, and I actually haven't taught a whole lot in the last 6 weeks. I think I've taught over a 7-week period. I've taught 2 times. I mean, I did this team teaching thing, but I mean, I've had to like prep a 30-minute talk 2 times in 7 weeks, which has been a great like rest. So I feel like I'm not reading as much, but it's there. But I made kind of a commitment that starting this year that I was going to read at least a book per topic that we did. Unfortunately, we are a topical teaching church, and so there were some weeks that I was having to read a book a week, kind of trying to get through. And I hate to read. I really do. It is not my favorite thing. I read out of necessity, but I mean, it's kind of like sometimes you do the right thing, even if you don't want to till eventually it becomes you do the right thing because it's what you need to do and you know it's the right thing, and it becomes comfortable in that space. And so the reading thing is a big deal. I hadn't heard of I think you mentioned Headway one time, but I wasn't in a space I could look it up. And so I've been looking at that while you were talking there. But I think those are just such big things. Scribd is pretty cheap. If people want to use Scribd, it's like $7, $8, $9 a month, and you can listen to audiobooks. There is something about audiobooks that are a big deal. If you're going, man, I'm just really money's tight, things like Libby and stuff like that, you can connect to your local library card, and there are a ton of books that you can just listen to, and on leadership and faith and life. And I think, Tony, you're a storyteller and a writer and things in that space, but you hear so many people who read a ton that say the best way to push yourself creatively is not to, and I'm the worst at this, like if it's not a leadership book, like a Christian principles or some type of faith thing, a commentary, I have zero interest in reading it. But one of the best things we can do is to pick up something that's a fiction book and read through it, or and let it kind of just let our mind almost rest. Kind of like our pitcher's arms will get to rest for the next 4 months. It's we get you get a chance. Your mind kind of like drifts off into a different land. And if you're going, I just have no interest in reading Grisham or, whoever, grab Tolkien, grab Lewis, grab some of these, men and women, go look up the Inklings, find out who those people were and find their fiction books and read that stuff. There's so much to that. And I think this year's been one of my best years of growth because I committed to reading. I committed to leaning into that. And it's given me such a chance to listen more, because I don't feel like I'm always trying to talk to figure things out. I've been able to sit and just let my heart kind of rest in what I'm doing. And I've spent way, and this may sound terrible as a pastor, but I've spent way more time in Scripture, like just a lot more time trying to navigate and sit through and working through First Peter right now. And it's just a really heavy book. And Peter has a tendency just to kind of slap us in the face a lot, but just a really strong text, and I think there's just something there. Take some time and sit and let God kind of work in those spaces. And as you're working that text and reading something over here that's maybe more fun or something you're interested in, it does shape how you see others, how you see the future, really, and how you see how you're going to lead your organization. Because at the end of the day, I know it's God's organization, but if you're the pastor, He's put you in that spot for this moment in time. And you need to be the one that takes that responsibility, and don't take it lightly, because it's a big load to carry, and that's why we're here. But also, you've got to take your responsibility in that and be sure you're equipped and ready to lead it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so in recap, we have got the 3 pillars of pastoral ministry: pastoral care, leadership, and preaching and teaching, all critically important. All things that you need to be doing. You need to figure out what your strength is and what you need to lean into, and lean into other people to help you with that. It's been great being back with you this week. For Robert Kell and Bruce Montgomery, who is relaxing on vacation somewhere and not answering our phone calls when we try to call him in, I'm Tony Marr, and it has been wonderful being back with you. We've missed you guys, and even though you haven't missed us, we've missed you. Robert, it was great talking to you, man.
Yeah, man.
And we will be back again next week for another edition of the Small Church Podcast. For more information, to reach out and to work more with us, find out more about us, visit higherministries.com or find Higher Ministries on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or whatever social media platform you want to use. Have a great week.